All of the American experts will be around all day, so you have plenty of opportunity to talk to them more about questions you may have. What we're going to do now is actually bring up one of our clients who's actually flown down from Sydney, which is fantastic to have a chat to you about what he's been doing, and because he's been building a portfolio now for about nine months in America. And sometimes it's interesting to hear from people about how they're doing what they're doing, and Mark's put together a presentation. He's going to have a chat to you about his portfolio, and he's put some numbers around all his personal information, which is great of him to share his own story so far. So if you can welcome Mark Taylor, please.
Hi everyone. So I suggested to Stephen it might be good. I've been to a few of these seminars myself, and I think it's sometimes good to hear from someone who's sitting on the other side of the fence rather than presenters, albeit how good they may be. And I'm just going to share you my journey for what it's worth, as it is. There's no sales pitch here. It's just sharing the journey and some lessons that I've learned along the way and how it's tracked for me. And totally open to any question. I'll just answer it as I see it. So that's only my agenda, is really just to help other people with their journey to make the right decision. One of the things I always encourage people is just make sure you know what your own strategy is and make your own decisions. So you can listen to different experts and they may have different opinions, but in the end of the day, it's your money. You've got to take ownership for your own decisions. Experts are here just to help you with that, but don't let an expert make your decision for you and feel that you can then come back to them. You've got to make your own decisions and be accountable for that. So some pictures of properties in my portfolio, but I'll go through a few more of them through this presentation. In terms of background, from a credibility point of view, I put this up not just as a show off or anything like that, just to show that I do have some property experience. So hopefully you're hearing from someone I would consider myself a professional property investor. In terms of property specifically, I do have experience in the UK, USA now, Middle East and Australia. So one of the things in the US, I take property from a global perspective. A lot of people can be very insular to their hometown, even that's where they're comfortable. For me, I just look at opportunities, and it's a pure numbers game for me. I'm not wedded. In fact, none of the properties I have anywhere in the world I've actually been to myself. So I think I've been to one in Melbourne because it's down here, but I haven't left my living room for most of my property investment. That's just how I do these things. I've done everything property from off the plan, negative gearing. I've dabbled in property development, property renovation, strata titling. And from all of that, I do run a property club. It's called Keys to Success Club, really helping other people invest in property and get wealthy in property. And I'm the property columnist for Rex Airlines, SkyWest Magazine. So if you're ever flying to any of the regional places in Australia, you'll see I run a monthly column where I interview experts. So that's a little bit about me in terms of property and where I sit in the scene. You've heard this all before. This is the reason I did invest in US. I had property investments in Australia, but I'm pretty flat to negative on Australian property, even though I've got a few, and I'm wondering how I might get out of a couple of them. But I just think it's pretty limited in the short term. Like a lot of people, I've got a lot of super in shares, and if we haven't all had a journey in that, where's that heading? Who knows? Too volatile, no control. So I didn't want to put more money into shares. Bank saving rates are low. I had money to invest, but I literally held on to it for 18 months. I was like, I don't know what to do here. I'm really struggling. What can I actually do with this money? And Stephen's on my expert panel. He's done my finance broking in Australia for a long period of time. And he approached me and said, you've got this thing in the US. What do you reckon about your community? And I said, well, actually, before I do anything in the club, I want to play myself because I don't want to recommend anything or do anything or offer advice to anyone unless I've experienced myself. So the timing was good. For me, it's about low entry costs, immediate and ongoing cash flow, potential for capital growth upside, and strong Aussie buying power, which you've all heard before. So I think that the opportunity is so clear, it's hard to believe. And actually, when you start getting used to the money in your bank, it's kind of a bit weird as well. But it's not the opportunity that stops people. It's the fear, from my perspective, that stops people doing it, not the opportunity. The numbers they just stack up. It's the end there's no point going into that in any more detail. I'll share my numbers as well so you can see that. So this is my personal strategy. Again, make your own strategy. My personal strategy is I wanted to ensure that I had an overall cash-on-cash return, excluding capital growth. I took capital growth as icing, although I've been quite pleased with what I've achieved, and having heard the Cape Coral presentation, I'm quite happy about where that's heading at the moment. But I just took capital growth out of the equation as a nice to have, quite different to Australia. And I was going for an overall cash-on-cash return. So that's the money I put in, including all my costs, not just operating costs, closing costs, buyers, fees, the whole box and dice. I want it to be more than 10%. And I'm going to use finance to achieve that. So I use that as a investing strategy overlaid with the markets, which you hear today, overlaid with the different types of loans. And you'll see later on that a lot of different types of loans. I overlay all those components and go, can I get more than 10% as one of my key criteria? Use finance, I'm a big believer in that, to improve that. So that gives me effectively more opportunities to invest in potentially higher growth markets in America whilst maintaining the 10% net cash return. You'll see, I'll give an example of how I've achieved that. Diversified portfolio, high yield, low yield, basically allows me to tap into capital growth, but also maintain my 10% mix across multiple states. Older, newer properties, these are more as an outcome of that strategy. In order to get the high yield with some capital growth, I've got a mix of older and newer, and I'm in different states, it's effectively where that's ended up. And they're all foreclosed and rehabbed, so that's my personal strategy. I'll send this slide deck to anyone who wants it afterwards. If you don't, you have to make notes if you want to see it. So here's a little map. So where I'm at the moment is 3 states, Tennessee, Florida, North Carolina, which we won't talk about today. Does my little pointer working? Yeah, here we go. So it's actually a year ago, Stephen, goes fast, but April anniversary, I'm getting my taxes, most of which I haven't paid for the Memphis, but I'm trying to work out how to do that at the moment. so it's 5 in Tennessee, 3 in Florida, and 2 in North Carolina is effectively the property. It's a mix of 4 that have closed, 5 that are currently in progress at the moment, i.e. I've chosen the property, put the cash down, I'm just waiting for finance. You'll see the finance arrangement. Stephen's going to talk through that later. And 1, I've got my strategy. I know where it's going to be. I know which finance I'm going to play, but I haven't chosen the property. So this is my journey. I haven't got all 10 at the moment. I'm just showing that with you now.
All the houses don't look like that.
No. That's just
I'm saying that's amazing. You found exactly the same house everywhere.
this builder's amazing. He goes everywhere, this builder. I recommend him highly. No, I'll show you some pictures of the actual houses. Here they are. So Cape Coral, you've seen a bit about that. That's my Cape Coral one. Tennessee, Memphis, Carolina, and Jacksonville in Florida as well. So you can see a little mix between a new one there. It's kind of my newest, most expensive one, cheapest, oldest one. That's my mix. And in terms of how that plays out, so Cape Coral, yeah, look, higher value. I paid 94 for this one. So judging by it, it's probably going to be worth 110, 120. I'm getting a valuation recently, so that was about 9 months ago. You can see the inside. I was like, well, this is much better than my own house. I better get the hell out of Australia and live in Florida. But that's just the way it is. It's newer, excellent condition, lower risk. Yeah, definitely. To be honest, I barely even think about that property. It just ticks away. I've got a 2-year lease. I've had no issue whatsoever, and does its thing. But it does have lower rental yield, 10 to 15%, and higher capital growth. I bought it for that. Let's see, but at the moment it seems to be tracking well. And then the other bottom end of the level, it's around 40k. They're up to 45 now. So I've had capital growth in some of these earlier ones. It's around 90-64, average consistent. I got a bit stressed when I saw a building inspection, to be honest. So just if you're going to that area, it's not a full renovation. It meets the market. So in Florida, I was like, oh, what an awesome place. In the ones in Memphis, I was a little bit shaky. So just be aware of that when you get your first building inspection. If you want to play in this 40 to 50k area, a rehab is not a full as new renovation. It gets it to the standard that meets the market, and you don't want to overcapitalize. High risk vacancy repairs. Yeah, look, it's just a little bit more stressy. So, but I'm getting much better returns. And to put that in perspective from a money, there's slightly different loans on these two, but I get $300 a month from this one, net after loans, after operating expenses, and I get $300 a month for the same. I get roughly the same amount, but obviously that's cost a lot more, so my returns are low. But they're both positive cash flow, but I've had to invest more. So you just got to weigh up whether you can handle a bit of the more of this to get more of that. It's up to you. And who knows on the capital growth? We'll see. So finance options. We'll hear a lot more of my take on this, and again, this is just my take, my opinion, that it started off to get these finance individuals around 8.75%, around 50 to 60% LVR, 5 to 8 years, P&I, pretty easy, low documentation, 2 weeks, still done and dusted, no problem. Starting to see these finance groups come more recently. These are the more exciting ones. You'll see one later on, where we're getting much lower rates, much higher LVRs, much longer term, and you can also get interest only. That changes the whole dynamics of what you could do with your strategy. So that's a really exciting one. I'm going to be using that in those next 4 that are 5 that are closing at the moment. And I've got a couple of bank ones where they're one-off items. They don't get advertised too much because they're not across the board, but 4.25% you can get. Up to 75%, always P&I, but quite a lot of documentation. My Florida one took 3 months to close just on the finance side. They asked me so much, and I'm pretty, well, I believe I'm a good bet, and a pretty safe bet in terms of my background. So that's the options. I'm using all three of those options for my strategy. And here you go. This is my finance strategy. So you can see these. It's very easy to move in and out of finance, so it's quite different to here. So you can go in one finance and then swap into another one as you see new finance deals. And Stephen's got a lot going on, as you'll probably gather. And so the first three in Memphis are all up now 8.75%. I'm actually doing the first cash out. So I'm doing a refinance of those properties into a new loan, which will get almost all the money I invested in those Memphis properties out if the valuations meet what the market's meant to meet. So I'm actually doing the first. Some people worry about exit. How do you exit? How do you get your money out? Well, refinance is one option. Okay, so that's happening for me. So that's going to get refinanced to this group loan at 6.5%, 75%, and interest only. So that'll take the cash flows on those from $300 a month to about $480 a month, and I'll take most of my money back out. Which is, but I'm wearing more loan. I'm wearing higher loan, and it's for longer term. But so there's lots of strategy you can employ. See my first Florida one, Cape Coral was 5.25%. That was a cracking loan, that one, but it did take me 3 months. And the final one is this one here, which is the one I haven't identified, but there's one loan here I can get at 4.25%. It has to be over $100,000 property, so I've got my eyes set on that for a one-off big new property in Florida. So that's how I've used finance. You can see once you start overlaying all those percentages, LVRs and interest, that you really need to think about the finance options as well as overlay the market and work out what your strategy is to determine how it all fits together. So this is my personal spreadsheet of all my properties. And I'm going to pull out a few things on here. So the overall amount to purchase those 10 I've talked about is $215,000 of personal cash. Some of that's cash, some of it's a reinvestment, refinance of an Australian property. If you are going to refinance an Australian property to invest in the US, please talk to Stephen first, because there are some difficulties to do that. Don't just go and talk to your banks, because you may not get it. So that was a mix of cash I had plus a refinance. Gross ROI is averaging at 16%, which is this figure here. So you can see I've got 19% down to around 13% for the Florida one. And that's compared to 4 to 5% in Australia. I've seen those numbers before. The finance thing, so net ROI, 11% is what I'd get if I'd paid cash. Okay, that's net ROI with a lot of figures in here, but I'd be getting 11% return if I just paid cash for these properties. Through the use of finance, it goes up to 27%. So that's why finance increases your cash flow. So those are my actual numbers, and there's a massive difference in that. So especially because I'm refinancing out of Australia, I need to make sure it's well above 10% returns for me in terms of cash on cash. So whilst I have greater than 10%, that's on an individual property level. Overall, you can see I'm way ahead of that. 20% is after all the closing costs. So I had a target of 10%, which every single property is above 10%. You can see my Memphis ones with that refinance, because I've taken capital out, it goes up to 60%, because basically I've got hardly any money left in there now. No capital growth in any of this stuff. Okay. A couple of other things. This is the amount per year after loans for each of those properties, from $4,000 for the Memphis ones, around about $7,000 for that big Florida one I've got my eye on. $44,000 cash flow per year after all costs, after loans, on paper. Okay, that's what it's worth. That's starting to get up there in terms of, that's pretty good really, starting to move. First couple of properties, it was kind of chicken feed, $3,000, yeah, okay, maybe I'll get it, maybe I won't, $2,000. When you start getting, if you double that, $100,000, then you're starting to get some real choices, I believe, in terms of, well, you can quit your job, do half a day a week off, or 2 days a week off, or just change your job. So $100,000 cash flow is, for me, starting to get really, really interesting, and that's one of my targets. So one example here, I probably should do a deep dive on Cape Coral, actually, but I haven't quite got all the numbers. But this is the latest on my first property. So as Stephen said, your first one often has a little bit of emotion to it. I paid $38,000 for it. It's up there, you can see it. And it was at 50% P&I over 7 years, 90,000 deposit, 6,800 closing costs. At that time, there was a buyer's agent's fee, so you guys are coming at a good time. So my costs were higher than you'll pay nowadays. This is the amount I received, $3,000 after expenses and loans, $3,000 in my bank account for that first 8 months. It's about $360 a month. Doesn't include insurance and taxes, it's about $1,000 I've got to pay. So it's basically performing as per expectations. It's actually got a valuation or market prediction that it'll be valued at $47,000 now, which I wasn't expecting, but we'll see if that comes out. That's a 24% increase in that time, and I'm currently refinancing it. So that's that thing I talked about. It'll take out $18,000 back. So I put in $27,000. I'll take $18,000 out, and it'll be up to 75% LVR. But my amount will go from $360 to $480 a month. So I'll be pretty happy with that investment, having $5,000 left in, and I'm getting $480 a month out of that property. So buying experience, these are just showing some things that I enjoyed and didn't enjoy. So my tips would be, first of all, make sure you think about your owning entity. So I put some in my own name, and now I've got to put some in an LLC, and I've got to transfer some out because I didn't realise this, and I had all these things. So I've had a bit of admin to do. So have a think about whether you're putting your own name or an LLC before you do stuff. It's not, I knew there was going to be some hassle. It's not quite as big a deal as in Australia where you have all this stamp duty. It's quite easy to change names. And at the time, it was the right thing to do, put it in my name, but so don't get too stressed about it, but it's probably easy to work out what you're going to do at the start. Think about your Australian tax. One of the reasons I had to move from my own name to LLC was new understanding of how I was going to handle tax in terms of most tax efficient way of handling my Australian tax returns for all this US stuff, which I hadn't really got my head around until then. So have a think about that, because it may affect your structure. Get your banking set up, and then also determine your personal strategy, as I've talked about. Then pretty simply work out your strategy. You can have all these guys and tip into them, but you've got to work out your strategy and then get a property or a selection of property that fits that strategy. Look at the loan options and the financials. Property due diligence is an interesting one. Sometimes the valuations are done by the finances, and that's a nice little health check. Sometimes the properties don't get valued. It's just the reality. So you either can pay for a valuer or just take the punt. But if you've got finance, some finances do the valuations for you, and of course that gives you a bit of peace of mind. Definitely have building and pest inspections completed. It's an option. I just think it'd be silly not to. It's not that big a deal. And even though I haven't used it to come out of a property, I've used it to make sure certain things were done before I took over ownership. So I've always got my money back in terms of the cost for that. If you're going to go independent, there are some legal stuff. Make sure you either use someone who knows, don't get caught out, because there are some horror stories out there on that. Check on the tenants or rent guarantees and assess your property manager. So I've had some stories. I've changed my property manager twice so far. So I have had some, I haven't been caught out by the property manager, but I would have if I hadn't have changed. So yeah, and I think we're set up pretty well in terms of this room now, which is good. Any questions as we go through, I'm happy to answer, by the way. Ownership's really not. So here's my stats in terms of vacancy. So I've had a pretty good run on vacancy to date. So I've had 95% and above vacancy rate across my properties so far. I had one property that was vacant for 6 weeks initially. 4 weeks was covered by rent guarantee, so I lost 2 weeks of rent. Had full vacancy until March, and I've just had my first one go vacant this month in Memphis. So that's my vacancy. So be careful on this one, because there are stories out there where if you don't have, it all looks good on paper. If you haven't got a tenant, it pretty much looks bad on paper. I can tell you that. It's the quick way for it to become a bad experience. So it's really important to be careful on where your property is located in terms of good access to tenants, and also the property manager, and any rent guarantees or tenants going in. I'd go for tenants on closing with my preference, because a rent guarantee was typically time bounded, and a month's fine, but what if the tenant's not in for 6 months? The one where I've had a vacancy was actually, it was in tenanted, and then 3 months afterwards the tenant left. So be it. Rental payments, they're broadly speaking being paid on time, although it was pretty shocking to me, some of the mechanisms that were in pay and cash drops. And my bank, the rental agent in Florida, gets money dropped off to him, then he drives an hour in a car to a bank account to put it in, and he's telling me, I'm going, can you change banks because it's too far to drive? I'm like, what's going on? So some of the things are quite shocking, I found. I had one tenant lose a check, and I think they were 100 off, and one I agreed to hold their rent for 2 months because they had a death in the family, and so I just said, well, that seems like a nice thing to do for them, and they did pay it all back, so that was nice. I'd assume 1 month vacancy in all your analysis. 1 month either vacancy or rental payment issue. I'd stick that in, especially if you're in the 40 to 70k bracket. In Florida, I've got a 2-year lease, so it's just doesn't happen at the moment. Maintenance met my expectations. I had 1 tree that needed cutting and 1 plumbing issue, so less than I had in Australia. But I do get the feeling, although I've got no evidence yet, that newer properties need less maintenance, but I haven't actually had too much of a maintenance issue so far, but I maybe because my property manager hasn't actually been doing any of the maintenance, so we'll see on that one. Property management, they're all managed by a third party. I found them much less professional in Australia to date, and some of the statements were hard to read. It's getting more professional for Memphis, and I've just changed into Florida based on the tropical man's good sales pitch, so we'll see how he goes. And I'm hoping that takes it to the level I expect of my Australian properties, which is basically, I don't want to hear anything. Just I put a float in there, $500. If you're thinking about 10 properties, you don't want someone calling up saying, "Can I fix the sink?" It's just like, do whatever it is. It's more than $500. Let me know. Otherwise, I don't want to know. Just make sure the money comes in. When it's so positive cash flow, you get much less stressed about things like that. Basically, as long as it's positive each month, I'm not actually that bothered. As long as it's not a big deal and they're doing the work. So give them authority. I just give them authority. Please do your work. Make sure the tenant's looked after. You're $500 per hit. Go for it. Don't bother me, and just let me know if there's a vacancy, and that's it. That's how I run it. And the banking, the money has gone in each month. I had some banking issues, so yes, the banking was a bit of a nightmare. It took me 3 months to do with 1 online transfer to pay and I had lots of shenanigans, but we've now found a new bank, and they seem really good. So I've now got private email access to the bank, all my bank accounts set up in one place, online bank transfer, so I'm particularly excited by that. There's one of my property managers was asking me to pay a plumber by cheque, so hopefully that's not going to happen anymore in the new world. Basically for me, it's online banking. I just want to do everything through the internet. I haven't left my house to do any of this, and I have no intention of doing that, and I don't want to speak to anyone particularly. I just want to do it by email. That's how I want to run the portfolio. Okay, so my strategy for next is build a suitable buffer. I haven't used any of the money I've had. So last year I made $8,000 from those first 3 properties, just sitting in the US bank account. I couldn't actually work out how to get it out, so that's why it sat there. But hopefully I'll work that out. But I'm not really bothered because I want it to be up to $15,000 before I do anything with it. That's the buffer I want in there. Then use additional cash flow to invest. With the 10, that's $40K a year. It's probably 1 to 2 properties a year out of that cash flow. And refinance as capital grows. So out of those first 3 Memphis ones, I'll get out $47,000 of one-off capital from the refinance. So I can invest that. So as the capital goes up, then I'll refinance, but whilst keeping my overall cash flow rate at 10%. And aim to have 15 to 20 properties by 2017, and a cash flow of $100,000 a year, and hopefully some good capital growth. So that's my story in 20 minutes, and happy to take any questions on any front. I'll say it as it is. Yes?
So when you changed your property manager, did you experience any breakdown in management of your property? Like, you were not getting rents and there was pickup?
The Memphis ones, it was a buyout actually, so that the new company bought out the old guy, and so they were in it together, so that was no issue at all. And the Florida one, I'll let you know, because I've only signed the contract yesterday. So, I don't know. Yes.
You got any Section 8 tenants within your property?
I did look at that at the start, because I always thought it seemed quite good. The answer is no at the moment. None of them are Section 8. But Memphis, I thought some of them were going to be, but I don't. Section 8 is a government-funded thing where they guarantee the rent's actually paid by the government. So theoretically, the appeal is it gives you much more certainty on the lower income rentals, because they have to apply to be a Section 8 tenant and the government backs it. That's my understanding. But there's a little bit more.
Rent control there.
Yeah, some kind of guaranteed rent subsidy type program by the government to help low income earners.
I can explain that a bit further if you like.
Yeah.
Each state has a housing authority, and there are certain, what would seem on the surface, disadvantaged clientele, but some of them aren't so disadvantaged, that get a subsidy or a voucher from the housing authority, which entitles them to a certain amount of money per property. Now, it may be that it's based on a 2-bedroom property because it's a small family or a single person, or it might be a 3 or 4-bedroom family with a few kids. It might be $1,000 or something like that a month. Quite often it will cover all of the rent.
Yeah.
Sometimes it will cover, all bar, say 10% or 20% or something like that. But the housing authority pay it directly to your bank account on about the 3rd of every month.
Yeah.
And it's a way of having at least reducing some of the risk in your rent.
I was quite keen on it, but maybe Stephen, they didn't seem to come up. That's what happened.
Sounds like rent assistance.
Yeah,
in
rent
Australia. What's
assist.
into
Yeah.
them?
What, how many Section 8s are we
We'll
doing?
cover Section 8.
Yeah.
I've got 2 Section 8s.
But in terms of the ones that are on offer, how many are they?
You'll find in most markets, the management will 20 to 30% of their pool.
Yeah, okay.
Memphis, they try and get a lot of them.
Yeah.
Kansas City, you've got about 20% of their rentable for Section 8s. But we will cover that
It
question.
just sounds like rent assistance here in
It's
Australia.
similar. It is similar to rent assistance, but it's not the house isn't a Section 8 house. The client
No,
Section 8.
clients are, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other
We'll
questions?
cover that. Excellent. Thank you, Mark.
If you do want any more questions, I'll put my details up. You can call me or email me. And if you want a copy of the presentation, I'll send it out to you if you email me as well. Don't send my numbers out too far though.